you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Yes, welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here. The way we do this, the way we generally do this is I give my opening remarks, and then after I give my opening remarks, then I do the roll call, or I call you out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out who's here, and that's always fun. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions. So the way this works is as I'm giving my opening remarks, keep the super chats rolling in. I will write them down with this clicky pen. After that, I will have them in this fancy pants notebook. I'll write them down and then I will answer them, and that will be our show. That's 3 parts. First part is opening remarks. Second part is the roll call, and the third part is answering super chats. That's how it works here. And I do have unnamed orange beverage tonight. Plenty of it. You got to shake it up or else the pulp ruins it. You got to shake it up. Unnamed orange beverage. That's what I'll be drinking as we do our show tonight. So like I said, keep the super chats rolling in. I always encourage people to post this wherever videos are posted. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Bunker Chan, Prol Wiki, Reddit, wherever videos are posted or menaced by international communism, you shall post the video. No, it's an old Monty Python thing. I don't know if people have ever seen that. There's a sketch on Monty Python called Bicycle Repairman, and it's an old comedy sketch from Monty Python. And Bicycle Repairman, the hero Bicycle Repairman, he just goes around repairing people's bicycles. And then it ends, he's like walking away into the sunset. And then it's wherever bicycles are broken or menaced by the threat of international communism, Bicycle Repairman will smash the commies or something. It turns into like a McCarthyite rant. I think it's probably was a joke about American television at the time. It was the British, Juan Perón fascist, it was the British, kind of spoofing American TV in the way it was. But anyway, so... wherever super chat questions are asked or menaced by international communism, I will be there to answer your super chat questions, to smash the commies. Anyhow, worst way capital effects. All right, the worst way capitalism affects social relations. Very good. All righty. So on that note, I'm going to start with my opening remarks. I'm going to start with my opening remarks for tonight, and then I'll do the roll call, then I answer your super chats. That's how we're doing it tonight. So there you go. I want everyone who's with us now to take a deep breath. Breathe in. Breathe out. Get comfortable where you're sitting. Enjoy yourself. Forget about everything it is you have to worry about. For those of us in the United States, it is Sunday night. Tomorrow is Monday. The work week continues. But you don't have to worry about that right now. You don't have to worry about school. You don't have to worry about work. You don't have to worry about stress related to your family or your friends. You can just engage with me right now. We can just have a conversation. You, in this moment with me, get a break. You get a break. Collapse. Afghanistan. You get a break. You can just take a nice little break. With me right now, you can just relax. Just not feel like the world is overbearing, just breathe in, breathe out, and enjoy yourself. We're going to have a little conversation. And the topic of my opening remarks tonight is power. And thank you, Gleb, for your super chat. The topic of my opening remarks tonight is power. Power. Now, okay, I wrote it down. Power. Power. Now, those of us who are Marxists, we have a Marxist understanding of the concept of power, right? Marxism teaches that labor is the source of all wealth. Recent shift from right-wing libertarianism to Western right-wing libertarianism to wokeism. Labor is the source of all wealth. I've never seen $1 pick up a shovel. Never seen a dime dig a trench or erect a building. Never seen it. It's human labor and human creativity that is the source of all value and all wealth. And one of the problems that prevails in our society is the abundance of what Karl Marx referred to as fictitious capital. Fictitious capital. And this is what Marx referred to as wealth and investments that, if they were to vanish, the nation would be just as wealthy and just as poor as before. It's money made from other money. Speculation. Derivative rip-off schemes. Interest. Developing Marxist skills. And one of the problems that tends to precede a financial crisis is that the way the capitalists continue to make money while the economy is getting worse, while the spending power of the workers is decreasing, while the wages of the workers are going down, while the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold, the way the capitalists insulate themselves from the natural results of their decisions, as the gap between the rich and poor expands, as unemployment rises, as infrastructure collapses, one of the ways the capitalists insulate themselves is with fictitious capital. While actual wealth in the country is decreasing, people are getting poorer, communities are becoming less stable and less developed, poverty is rising, hunger is rising, food insecurity is rising. As all of this goes on, the capitalists insulate themselves by piling up more fictitious capital, piling up more money made from money. As the living standards of the people go down, the more money made from money, dollars made from dollars, goes up. While the people continue to get poorer and cannot buy the products, more dollars made from dollars goes on. More schemes to make money from money continue. More betting on the stock market. More gambling. More usury. More predatory lending. More rip-off schemes. And dollars made from dollars continue to pile up as the country overall gets poorer and poorer and poorer. And pretty soon, that leads to a crisis. dollars made from dollars. Fictitious capital does not make the country wealthier. Without a strong physical economy, all that worthless paper that's been made from other worthless paper soon fades into nothing. And it's human labor. It's the wealth created by humans going out and working with their hands, and working with their sweat, and using their brains to create. That is the source of wealth. And that is the real source of power in the universe. Human labor and human creativity is the source of all wealth. That plus natural resources. Labor and nature are the sources of all wealth. And this is something that doesn't want to be acknowledged by the current order, but it is a fact. It is a reality. It is a truth that they do not want to admit. Power. Power resides in the people. Power resides in human beings. Power resides in really what defines human beings. Human labor and human creativity separate us from animals. Ants have been building their ant farms the same way for thousands and millions of years. Beavers have been building their beaver dams the same way for millions of years. But in just 6,000, 7,000 years, human beings have gone from caves in the woods to iPhones and space travel. Frederick Engels, he said, the animal merely uses his environment, but humanity forces the environment to serve him. And that is the final distinction between human beings and animals. And it is labor, human labor, the real source of power, human labor, the source of all wealth, that defines that distinction. There's a very good essay by Frederick Engels called The Role of Labor in the Transition from Ape to Man. And it talks about this distinction of what it means to be a human being, that human beings are the tool-making creature. Human beings are the creative creature. Human beings are the creature that is constantly reinventing its relationship with its environment, reinventing the mode of production, rearranging the way their societies are organized. That human beings have a capacity that other species do not have. I'm going to specifically tonight talk about an aspect of this. An aspect of power. An aspect of strength and power, and where human beings acquire it. Right. Russia, ex-Soviet, Central Asian republics. Folks, I want to give a special shout out to any of my Canadian comrades who are watching tonight. Communist Party of Canada, or one of the various socialist groups in Canada, trade union organizers in Canada. Shout out to you. I admit I have never in my life been to Canada. It is one of my greatest regrets. I have been to Ecuador, I've been to Venezuela, I've been to Iran. Never been to Canada. I've never been to Canada, but one of these days I will get to Canada and I will find out what it's all about. I'll find out what it's all about, and that'll be good. But shout out to my Canadian comrades, because there's a story that has been told many times in the communist movement. Right. Right. BOR, real wealth. All right. It's been told many times. The story goes like this. In the year of 1933, I believe this was in Toronto, in the capital city of Toronto, there was a doctor who was from a wealthy family. He liked to party. He liked to listen to jazz music. He liked to get drunk. He was a surgeon. He was wealthy. But it was the Great Depression, 1933. He was walking down the street, and he saw a crowd of people with a banner that said, "Food for our children, milk for our wives, jobs." It was an unemployed demonstration. An unemployment council, an unemployment association was marching through the streets of Toronto. Protesting. And the police charged at them on horseback with their clubs and started clubbing them. But being a doctor, this doctor ran to the scene of the demonstration, offered medical assistance to the demonstrators who were beaten up and bloody and knocked to the floor by the police. I believe he got arrested, was taken to jail, talked to the demonstrators. And the very next day, they had their meeting of the Unemployed Association. They're just having their meeting. A man walked in. This very same doctor walked in, gave them his business card. He said, "I'm Dr. Norman Bethune. And if any of you need medical assistance, I will provide it to you for free. And I will bring 10 other doctors who will do the same thing." And he set up a clinic to give free medical assistance to low-income folks. And he began talking to the people in the Unemployment Association. Because this Unemployment Association was led by the illegal Communist Party of Canada. At that point, it was an illegal organization. But even though they were forced to operate in secret, the Communist Party of Canada was organizing the unemployed to fight for jobs and bread and housing during the Great Depression. Dr. Norman Bethune saw that so many people in Toronto or whatever major city in Canada it was, and were hungry, were needing medical care. He started providing medical care to them. And he started talking to the people in this unemployment council. He learned that they were communists, learned that they were members of the illegal Communist Party. And at that point, after he talked to them, he came out very publicly in favor of national health care, socialized medicine. And of course, many other wealthy doctors didn't like hearing that. He said that doctors should be civil servants, should be public employees, get a salary and provide health care to all who need it. Health care should be a human right. Just like the government provides paved roads, just like the government provides mail service, the government should provide health care. You have to imagine what Dr. Norman Bethune's family must have said to him at that time. They must have said to Dr. Norman Bethune, "What are you doing hanging out with those crazy radical communists? What are you doing hanging out with those smelly, dirty, hungry, poor people? What are you doing spending every Saturday, every free moment giving free medical care to low-income Canadians? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?" You can bet that his parents, his relatives, maybe even his wife, they said to him, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" But he did it anyway. Dr. Norman Bethune, he was told that the Soviet Union had a better system. That their socialist system was economically booming while the rest of the world was having a Great Depression. And he was a doctor, he was a wealthy man, and he could afford it. So Dr. Norman Bethune got on an airplane and he went to the Soviet Union. And this wealthy doctor, who just a year before had been dancing and partying with the rich, he saw with his own eyes what Stalin and the Soviet people were doing, building up a country from nothing. raising people up out of poverty, building the world's biggest hydroelectrical power plants, building the world's biggest steel manufacturing system, mechanized agriculture, wiping out illiteracy. And he saw that. And when he saw what Stalin was doing in the Soviet Union, while the rest of the world was crashing and burning, when he saw that the Soviet Union was just in an orgy of mass construction and industrialization, people were rising up from poverty and hunger and illiteracy, that rural huts were being replaced with modern housing units. When Dr. Norman Bethune saw that, he said, I have to join the Communist Party. So when he got back to Canada, he signed up to become a member of the Communist Party of Canada. I'm sure you can bet his family, all of his rich doctor friends, they were not thrilled with that. They must have said to him, why on earth would you join the Communist Party? It's an illegal organization. You'll go to jail, Dr. Bethune. You'll go to prison. And why in the world would you join an organization like that that's, tied to the Soviet Union, that wants a revolution to overthrow the old system? Why in the world? Why in the world would you do that? Why on earth would you do that? But Dr. Norman Bethune had seen how hungry his fellow Canadians were, how they needed medical attention. Dr. Norman Bethune had been to the Soviet Union and seen how, despite being a desperately poor country, they still had myself to death. They still were able to have so many achievements due to socialism. And he had no choice but to join the Communist Party. And then Spain, right? This country of Spain had a republic, had an elected government. And in Spain, they had a popular front, right? The Communist Party had a lot of seats in the elected government. The Socialist Party had a lot of seats. There were a lot of anarchist groups. And they were starting to do progressive things, like redistribute land. And there were progressive things going on. So Francisco Franco, a general in the Spanish military who had been a colonizer of North Africa, Francisco Franco announced he was going to overthrow the Spanish Republic. He was going to create a fascist dictatorship in Spain. And from all over the world, communists started going to Spain to form international brigades to go fight for the Spanish Republic. What did Dr. Norman Bethune do? Well, he went to Spain. He went to Spain to fight for the Spanish Republic, but not to fight, to be a doctor, to do blood transfusions, to help people. Dr. Norman Bethune went to Spain, gave up his comfortable life as a doctor in Canada, and he went to Spain to stand with the Spanish people, to defend the Spanish Republic against fascism. That wasn't enough for Dr. Bethune. After he'd been in Spain for a little while and worked very hard to advance the medical system of the Spanish Republic, to provide medical assistance and get the medical stuff going, after he'd done that, he heard that Japan had invaded China. The Japanese imperialists had invaded China. They were murdering and torturing and enslaving and raping Chinese people. He heard that there was this communist named Mao who was leading the 8th Route Army to resist the Japanese invaders, and also to redistribute land to the peasants, also to empower the Chinese women, to build a whole new China. So Dr. Norman Bethune, he went from Spain to China. When Dr. Norman Bethune got to China, he once again worked diligently to provide medical assistance and medical aid to the Chinese people, to treat Chinese folks who'd been injured in the war and in the fighting, to perform surgery. And while Dr. Norman Bethune was in China, and while he was performing surgery, he cut himself. He got an infection and died in China. And Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, spoke at the memorial for Norman Bethune and gave a special statement talking about how Norman Bethune's courage and his willingness to give up the comfortable life that he had, to stand with the unemployed, to stand with the Spanish people, and then to stand with the Chinese people, was just a real example of what the ideal communist would be. That kind of person that Dr. Norman Bethune was, that was the kind of person that could lead humanity toward the higher stage of communism. That kind of heroism, that kind of boldness, that kind of willingness to take risks, that kind of willingness to make sacrifices, that willingness to look death right in the face, to take great risks, to put yourself in danger, to leave comfort and stability. That was what communists needed to figure out how to pull out of people. That kind of heroism and courage, willingness to make sacrifices, willingness to do things that other people would not do, willingness to step up in ways that other people won't do. That was something that everyone should aspire to be like. Dr. Norman Bethune. What was it that made Dr. Norman Bethune, this wealthy, jazz club drinking, wealthy doctor, what was it that caused him that day in 1933, that he saw those protesting unemployed people? What was it that caused him to run over to them? What was it that caused him to not just look the other way? You can be guaranteed, you can be sure that on that day in 1933, there were many, many people who saw that demonstration and saw the police on horseback running at them, and they said, "Not my problem," and walked the other way. Dr. Norman Bethune did not do that. And by not doing that, Dr. Norman Bethune started himself on a path that led to great heroism, great sacrifice, and ultimately martyrdom for communism. Dr. Norman Bethune has been written into the history books as one of the greatest heroes of the Chinese Revolution. But it all started with one bold act, one giant leap, one decision, a snap decision. In that moment that he saw the crowd being charged by the police, he decided to go help them. And that decision that he probably didn't even think about, he probably didn't even ponder it for a moment. He just saw the people suffering, saw them being clubbed by the police, boom, went to help them. And that one decision changed the course of his life. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I'll tell you, some of the most important decisions in my life, and some of the best made decisions in my life, have been decisions that I made quickly, without thinking, without pondering. I just did it. Didn't ponder it, didn't think it over, didn't write out a list of the pros and cons. Some of the best decisions I have ever made in my life, I just did them. To move to New York City, right? That was a huge decision. To pack up everything and come to this city on a Greyhound bus. Came here on my birthday, December 30th, 2010. Never left. Been here ever since. That decision was a very, very quick decision. I didn't think it over. I didn't ponder it. I just did it. Thought I was coming for a month, and then it was possible for me to remain, and so I said, okay, I'll stay here. Boom. When I was asked, given the opportunity to go to Iran, to join the Red Crescent Society, and a humanitarian mission to Yemen, again, I didn't think it over. As soon as I got the offer, I said, yep, I'll do it. Boom. Got to think about it. Why do people make quick decisions like that have very big implications? Because a lot of times I will quibble over little decisions, right? Over little things that don't have that big of an implication, right? With little things, you'll sit there, geez, do I want to go to McDonald's today? Or do I want to go to Burger King? Do I want to, oh boy, should I take, this train to work or that train to work? Oh, geez, should I listen to another song on my iPhone? Or, people spend a long time quibbling over these little decisions. But Freudian. I would argue that those decisions are made by a higher than conscious part of the mind, right? We know about parts of the mind that are lower than conscious, right? Your sex drive, your emotions, your rage, right? Those things tend to be lower than consciousness. A lot of times you'll feel things that you can't justify. You might be angry, you might be hurt, you might be sexually aroused, you might be pumped up, you might be joyous, and your rational mind is not going, I've thought this very carefully and I shall be angry in response to your behavior. No, you're just angry, right? Your mind, when you're sexually aroused, your mind does not go, well, based upon the look of that beautiful woman next to me, I have determined that I shall become sexually aroused. No, it's not conscious, you just become sexually aroused. Those are lower than conscious desires. But I would argue that in addition to our lower than conscious mind, the part of our mind that is below consciousness, that is animalistic and primitive, we then have our conscious mind. But I would argue that we have something higher than consciousness. We have a higher intelligence. There is a side of our minds that is not conscious, that is smarter than our consciousness, that knows better than our conscious mind does. And when we can empower that part of our minds, when we can listen to the higher part of the mind, organizing under COVID, you listen to the higher part of the mind, sometimes we can override and make very, very good decisions. And there are many examples in U.S. history, many examples of heroic communists, heroic leftists, heroic revolutionaries, heroic anti-racists, heroic anti-imperialists who have done great things. Great things. Great, great things. You have to wonder, did they think it over carefully? Did they process it? Did they sit there and say, what are the implications of my doing this? Or did they just listen to that higher part of themselves that told them to do it? Think about John Brown. John Brown was the great abolitionist. John Brown as much as people describe him as heroic, which he was absolutely heroic. He was heroic. But he didn't seem to intellectualize things too much. When they asked John Brown why he seemed obsessed with opposing slavery, he would say, because of the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He'd say, if I was a slave, I would want someone to fight for my freedom. So, this is what I would have them do unto me. Right? So that's what I would do. Seems pretty simple, pretty straightforward, not very complicated. Not a philosophical manifesto, not a moral treatise, simply an expression of moral sentiments, that when people are held in slavery, this is an injustice. And so those of us who are not held in slavery have an obligation to fight against it. Not that complicated. But with that logic, John Brown went to Kansas. Secret speech. Went to Kansas. Fought against the pro-slavery militias in the infamous Bleeding Kansas period. With that logic, John Brown organized his raid on Harper's Ferry. He and 19 men seized Harper's Ferry, the armory, and were going to turn it into a stronghold of resisting slavery. They did not succeed, unfortunately. And John Brown was executed, hung for treason against the U.S. government for trying to incite an armed revolt. However, so many people looked up to him. So many people respected him. There was so much sympathy for John Brown. They were very afraid that there would be some kind of last-minute effort to free John Brown. So they had to practically send out the entire U.S. military to stand on guard while they executed John Brown. And they did. I mean, it was like practically the whole army was sent out. The military surrounded the gallows where they hung John Brown. A huge military detachment was there to make sure that no one rode in and saved John Brown. And John Brown was a hero of abolitionists. Victor Hugo wrote a letter to the U.S. government urging them not to execute John Brown. John Brown was a hero to Ralph Waldo Emerson, a hero to Henry David Thoreau, a hero to many American labor organizers and abolitionists for his opposition to slavery. And when the U.S. Civil War started, they started organizing brigades, soldiers to go fight in the U.S. Civil War against the South and against the slaveholders. Among the soldiers, a drinking song honoring John Brown became popular. Nobody quite knows who started this song. But among soldiers, in their army camps and in their army barracks, they would start singing, John Brown's body lies a-rolling in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, but his soul is marching on. And, these soldiers, I wrote it down. These soldiers would start singing this song honoring John Brown, right? And it caught on. And all across the U.S. Army, People were singing, John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, glory, glory, hallelujah. People were singing this all throughout the U.S. military. And John Brown, you have to remember, was executed for treason. Treason, right? I mean, this is a man who was hung for treason against the U.S. government, for trying to incite an armed revolt of black people against slavery. An armed revolt of abolitionists and black people against slavery. And all throughout the U.S. Army, people are singing a song honoring a man who was executed by the U.S. government for treason. And keep in mind, Abraham Lincoln is trying to tell everyone this war is not about slavery. This war is not about slavery. We're just trying to preserve the Union. This is not about slavery, everybody. The U.S. government is saying this war that's happening, it's not about slavery. It's not about slavery. But the fact that all the soldiers are marching into battle, John Brown's body lies a moldering, that seems to me like this has a lot to do about slavery. They're honoring an armed abolitionist who tried to revolt. So they outlawed. They had to ban the singing of this song. They said, this is not good PR. This is not good optics. We have to stop singing John Brown's body. But people kept singing it. I couldn't stop them. So finally, in order to stop the singing of John Brown's body, they rewrote the words. They rewrote the words. Did you know this? They rewrote the words to John Brown's body in order to stop people from singing it. And they made it an official U.S. Army song. And it's called the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vineyards where the grapes of wrath are stored. He is truth, the frightful lightning of his peril. I don't know. They rewrote John Brown's body into an official Army song to try and stop people from singing the John Brown lyrics. And now that's considered one of the most patriotic songs in the United States. I mean, you've heard it. If you've been in the United States, if you've watched an Army movie or you've done anything, you've heard John Brown's body, but you've heard the rewrite of it, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Well, that was John Brown's body. Because as the country was coming together to defeat the slaveholders, as Abraham Lincoln was building a coalition to defeat the slave system, right? CPI Australia. People realized that what John Brown had told them all about back in 1832 was correct. That slavery had to be defeated. The slaveholders were a curse upon the United States. They were committing horrendous crimes. I don't know if people recall, but there's a very famous speech that was given by Frederick Douglass. Right? Frederick Douglass was a former slave who became an abolitionist. And they invited him to a July 4th picnic. And he gave a very, very bold, bombastic speech. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? Calling out the hypocrisy of the United States. How dare they have a holiday to celebrate freedom when people are in chains? And slavery hurt the country in many, many ways. It held back industrial development. The British Empire liked slavery because it provided them with cheap cotton for their textile industry. The London Stock Exchange was a big supporter of slavery. Wall Street, they liked slavery because they got to insure those slave ships. Before Wall Street was a stock market, it was an insurance market. Wall Street was known for that. Before Wall Street, but outside of Wall Street, outside of London, outside of the homes of the wealthy slave plantation owners, slavery was hurting everybody else. It was hurting the country, holding back industrialization. It was, in the states where slavery existed, the white workers had the lowest wages of anywhere in the country. Why? Because they were competing with people who worked for free and didn't get paid at all. Slavery was an abomination. It was a curse upon the country. And slaves were breaking free. And so they passed the fugitive slave law and tried to force the states that didn't practice slavery to cooperate with arresting slaves and bringing them back. And then new states started coming into the country. The slaveholders, they launched the Mexican-American War and had the U.S. steal Texas and California from Mexico. And thousands of Americans were sent to die in a war to seize new territory for the slave owners. They were fighting for slavery. The Mexican-American War, remember the Alamo? That was about slavery. That was about expanding the slave system. Everybody was realizing that slavery was just a curse on the whole country. The black people were subject to horrendous treatment. They were not considered to be human beings. They had no rights. It was hurting the economy. It was hurting the country. It was holding back economic development. It was making a lot of British bankers rich. It was making a lot of slaveholders rich. Making a lot of Wall Street insurance cartels rich. It was hurting everybody else. Social democracies. I feel like you should send me social democracies. Alternative nuclear family. All right. Nuclear family. All right. It was a curse on the country. But despite the fact that so many people throughout the United States realized that slavery was wrong, realized that slavery was bad for the country, there was an understanding in the United States that it was bad, but the slaveholders of the South, the plantation owners, they were a lot of Supreme Court justices, they were big chunk of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress, they had a lot of money, they had a lot of wealthy friends in Britain, and they had too much power. There started to be an understanding. There started to be an understanding in the United States that in order to defeat slavery, there would have to be a big shift in the country. The will of the people would have to be emboldened. People were going to have to step up and be tough. People were going to have to step up and make sacrifices. People were going to have to step up and put their lives on the line in order to defeat slavery. It was going to require moral courage. It was going to require a spiritual shift. So all throughout the United States, well, not all throughout the United States, in New England and in the Midwest, in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Illinois, and in Massachusetts and upstate New York and in Vermont and in New England, there was something called the Second Great Awakening. It was a mass movement of religious fervor where all across America, well, not all across America, not in the South, but in the places I listed before, people started gathering for prayer meetings and religious sermons and gatherings, all focused on why slavery had to be abolished, why slavery was inconsistent with the Bible, why slavery went against the teachings of Jesus Christ. And it was one of the biggest movements this country has ever seen. Before the American Revolution, they had the First Great Awakening, which was a similar spiritual revival. But then, in the 1830s, they had the Second Great Awakening. And all across the United States, pastors and ministers, they wouldn't go to churches. They would set up tents out in the middle of a field, out in the middle of the woods. They'd set up a tent. And they would have tent revival meetings. And usually in the past, the way pastors had given sermons, they'd write them out and they would read them like this. But no, In the Second Great Awakening, they did the opposite. They spoke from memory. And during the Second Great Awakening, the audience was encouraged to be part of the speaking. The audience would shout, "Amen, that's right." And all across America, to mobilize the country for the fight that was to come, to lay the foundations of the awareness that slavery had to be defeated and that it was going to require guts and courage and boldness from the part of the population. These rallies they would have. I mean, it was back in that time, everything was about religion, so it was done in the name of religion. But all across New England, all across the Midwest, you had these tent revival meetings where pastors, like my ancestor, Charles G. Finney, would talk about slavery being an abomination and a violation of Jesus' teachings, and they would wave the Bible around, and they would give fiery speeches and sermons, and the crowd would shout back at them, and people that were involved in the slave trade would get up and repent and apologize for what they had done and ask forgiveness, right? I don't know if folks know the very famous American hymn, Amazing Grace, but it's a hymn that was written by a slave owner or a slave trader. And he realized it was wrong to be a slave trader, and he became a leader of tent revival preaching. One tradition they used to have in the Second Great Awakening, they would have a bench in the front row of the tent revival. And that bench would be for people that were on the fence, people that were not sure. They were not sure about their faith in God, not sure about the question of whether slavery needed to be abolished or not. They weren't sure about it. And they would sit on this bench. If you were not sure, you could sit on the bench in the front row. And if you were not sure, you would sit on the bench in the front row. Yeah, I saw that, 0 books. You would sit on the bench in the front row, and then the minister or the pastor would preach the sermon just to you. And the whole audience would be watching the people on the anxious bench. It would be watching their reaction to the speaker and watching their reaction to the preacher. And the preacher would be preaching his sermon right to those people on that bench, and the audience would be paying close attention to the preacher on the bench and paying close attention to the reaction of the people sitting there, and it would create this magical spiritual power. And the Second Great Awakening really laid the foundations for the American people realizing that slavery had to be defeated. And it was because of the Second Great Awakening that those soldiers went into battle to defeat the slaveholders singing John Brown's Body. It was really because of the Second Great Awakening. If there hadn't been a Second Great Awakening, there would not have been a civil war. Before you could have the Civil War, you had to have the Second Great Awakening. There had to be a mass raising of consciousness across the country. There had to be a mass psyching up of the population to understand the evils of slavery. Harriet Beecher Stowe had to write her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, about the horrors of slavery. Frederick Douglass had to go around giving his speeches about the horrors of the slave system. All of these things had to be done. You couldn't have had the Civil War without this stuff. If the Civil War had come and there hadn't been a Second Great Awakening, the Civil War had come and there hadn't been John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, if the Civil War had come and there hadn't been Frederick Douglass going around the country and giving his amazing speeches, if there had not been, Uncle Tom's Cabin, if there had not been the foundations laid, then the Civil War might have ended very differently. You have to lay the foundations before you can build the house. You have to lay the foundations before you can build the house. You have to lay the foundations before you can build the house. But once the foundations are laid, the house can be built. Once the tracks have been laid, the railroad can roll on through. But if you haven't laid the tracks and that train comes, it's going to be pretty bad for that train. And part of the Second Great Awakening, Reconstruction, part of the Second Great Awakening was tapping into that moral part of human beings, tapping in to that part of human beings that understood right and wrong, tapping into what it was that inspired Dr. Norman Bethune to go help those Canadian unemployed workers, tapping into what made John Brown go to Kansas to fight the pro-slavery militias and then go do his raid on Harper's Ferry. It was a mass movement awakening the higher part of the human mind, awakening human consciousness, stimulating the human mind, finding that light within, that truth, that soul that human beings have, that higher consciousness. And in a mass movement across the United States, awakening it for things that were to come. That's why they called it the Second Great Awakening. You had to stimulate people. You had to awaken the part of the human mind that is willing to go out and make sacrifices, that is willing to make a great contribution. You had to awaken it. And if you could not awaken it, the fight to come would be lost. You know, one of my favorite philosophical texts is the Phaedo, which is the account of the death of Socrates, written by Plato. And in that text, Socrates says that as soon as he found out he was going to be executed and given the death penalty, forced to drink the poison root of hemlock, that a dream came to him. And the same dream came to him, sometimes in one form and sometimes in another, but always saying, "Go forth and make music." And he interpreted that to mean that he should do as much teaching of philosophy as he could before ultimately being killed. And in his final conversations with his fellow philosophers, he urged them to think beyond their human bodies, to listen to their souls, listen to that higher consciousness, to not be attached to their bodily desires, but to listen to the part of them that strives for something better, something stronger, that drives them to go out and do great things, that drives them to think deeply. It's a beautiful text, a beautiful, beautiful text. Pushing people to be better than animals. Arguing that human beings are not simply creatures that can be easily manipulated and programmed to avoid pain and seek pleasure. We're not rats in a maze chasing after cheese. We're not Pavlov's dog who gets fed while they ring a bell. No. Human beings are very, very, very different than that. We're tool makers. We're creators. We're constantly changing the way we relate to our environment. Well, folks, the reason that I've said all of this is because I think that as much as people want to say that right now is a revolutionary moment, it isn't. We're not living in a revolutionary moment. We're not. We are not living in a revolutionary moment. We are not. But I would argue that we are living in the very early stages of a new great awakening. The The problem this time isn't slavery. The problem is capitalism. Capitalism is unsustainable. U.S. imperialism and the rule of the world by monopolistic bankers and corporations. It's got to go. But that is a hard pill for the American people to swallow, especially if you're a boomer. If you're a boomer, from the time you were a little tyke to the time of your adulthood, you've heard nothing but that communism is evil, communism is un-American, our identity as Americans is tied in with free markets, free market. It's a very hard pill for Americans to swallow. We've been told communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. We've been told that communism is evil. Communism violates freedom. It is a tough pill to swallow. It is a very, very tough pill to swallow. And it's not enough to intellectually know that we need socialism. Polls are coming out now and showing that very large percentages of the U.S. public are admitting that socialism is better than capitalism. Interest in Marxism is very high, especially among teenagers and the youth. It's very high. That's not enough. Right? It wasn't enough for the U.S. public to realize that slavery was wrong. You know, all across New England, there were many people who sat in their living rooms drinking tea and said, by golly, I think slavery is wrong. Well, gee golly, I think it's wrong too. Yes, it's certainly right. And that wasn't enough. There's a reason that they went across the country having tent revival meetings where people cried, where people screamed, where people waved their Bibles around. There was a reason that people got into pitches of fury and fervor, because it wasn't enough to know. It was not enough to know. Dark Age. It was not enough to know that slavery was wrong. That wasn't enough. There had to be an understanding among the population that now is the time to fight against it. Now is the time to go out and make sacrifices. Now is the time to live for something higher than yourself. Now is the time to connect to something more spiritual and more powerful that can defeat the power of the slaveholder and the banker and the monopolist. And while the consciousness was awakening to realize that slavery was wrong, there needed to be a spiritual awakening. There needed to be a stimulation of the population to get them ready to fight, to get them ready for the fight that was to come, to psych them up for the test that they would soon be put through. The foundations had to be laid before the house could be built. The tracks had to be put down before the train could roll on through. You couldn't simply know that slavery was wrong. No, that the consciousness of the people had to be awakened. There had to be an explosion of popular awareness about the evils of slavery. There had to be an explosion of calls for moral will and sacrifice. You had to have an atmosphere that would produce a John Brown or a Frederick Douglass or a Harriet Tubman. You had to create mass consciousness, mass awareness, and mass fanaticism. It was time to unleash fanaticism. All our lives in the United States, we are taught you should never be a fanatic. All things in moderation. Never be a fanatic. Never, never, never be a fanatic. Never, 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 never be a fanatic. Don't be fanatical. Don't do anything in excess. Be calm. But you know what? If you had a heart attack right now, and you're being rushed to the hospital, I have a feeling that you would not be laying there in the ambulance saying, please don't take me to a doctor who got straight A's in medical school. Take me to a normal, middle-of-the-road doctor. I haven't read that article. Take me to an average, normal doctor. Oh no! If your life was on the line, if you were facing life or death, You would want to be treated by a fanatical doctor. You would want to be treated by the best doctor you could imagine. You would want to be treated by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing, had performed that operation many times, knew it inside and out. You would want to be treated by the Norman Bethune of 2021 if your life was on the line. There's a time in history for fanatics. There's a time for extremists. There's a time for those who boil with passion and emotion. There's a time for them. There's a time for such people. I would argue that right now, as we are seeing the insane illogic of capitalism play out, we're seeing the outmoded system of U.S. imperialism falling to pieces as our country has been devastated by the pandemic, mass unemployment, mass hunger. Now is the time. Now is the time for a new great awakening. We must lay the foundations. Across the United States of America, people need to be awakened. And it's not enough for them to intellectually realize that socialism is better than capitalism. Not enough. It's not enough for them to think that a worker co-op scheme might be better. No, not enough. Not enough for them to, read a Jacobin article or two. Not enough. Not enough for them to watch some BreadTube. Nope. Not enough. Not enough for them to join a group on the internet and enter their credit card information and join some group. Oh no. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. The time has come for a new great awakening. The time has come for psyching up the population for the tests that are ahead of us. Right. Corporate. Now is the time. Now is the time. Now is the time for millions of people across the United States to have their higher consciousness stimulated. Now is the time for millions of people across the United States to be told that imperialism is the main enemy of humanity, that capitalism must be abolished, that the banks, factories, and industries must become public property, that you can become the next Norman Bethune, you can become the next Che Guevara, you can become the next Ho Chi Minh, the next Fidel Castro. You can do it. You could be the next Eugene Debs, the next Huey Newton, the next William Z. Foster or Claudia Jones. You're capable of something better than sitting on your computer, feeling hopeless, feeling pessimistic, wallowing in drugs, self-pity, hopelessness, pessimism. You can be something better than that. But you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. The way you'll be something better than that is by joining with other people, by being part of a collective, by being part of a joint effort that will be dedicated to every day making you the best you can be, making you better, pushing you to be something higher, demanding of you more sacrifice and more contribution. You can be a fanatic. You can be a fanatic like John Brown. You can be a fanatic like Huey Newton and the Black Panthers. You can be a fanatic like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You can be a fanatic like Gus Hall. You can be a fanatic. You don't have to be a postmodern, pessimistic, hopeless Zoomer or millennial. But in order to be that, in order to be all that you can be, you need to join with other people. You need to be part of an atmosphere and a collective and a cooperative that stimulates your consciousness, that surrounds you with socialism, that fine-tunes your skills in agitation and mass outreach and mass communication, that connects you with other people. You can do it. Thank you, Gleb. I'm glad you liked it. You can do it. You are capable of something so much better than this. Now is the time for a new great awakening. We need to be having the communist version of tent revival meetings all over this country. People need to be gathering together, learning about socialism, learning about Marxism, and psyching themselves up for the fight to come, building communities of solidarity, holding each other accountable, going out and doing the work, giving their lives to this. A lot of people watching this right now don't like who they are. I don't blame you. You know, I wouldn't like who I was. I didn't like who I was before I was a revolutionary. Everything in this society wants you to not like who you are. Everything in this society wants to tell you you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not athletic enough. You're not handsome enough. You're not rich enough. You're not smart enough. You're mentally ill. You've got a chemical imbalance in your brain. You need more medications. You need to buy our product so you can look better. You need to go and run up student debt so you can be more qualified to get a job that isn't there. No, you're not good enough. This society says to you, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. That's what the society says to you. Every day, it's coming out of your cell phone. It's coming out of your laptop and your computer. It's coming out of your iPad and your iPhone. It's coming out of your TV screen. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. You don't have value. You're nothing. You're not Kim Kardashian. You're not Paris Hilton. You don't have value. It's breathing this pessimistic, hateful message is coming out of everything on mainstream media, everything on television. It's pushing this poison onto you. It's pushing this poison onto you. So, of course, there's a lot of people watching this right now that don't like who they are, that think that who they are isn't good enough, that they just don't like who they are. Well, I can tell you something. I don't know this. I never met Dr. Norman Bethune. I've got a feeling that Dr. Norman Bethune, he might have been a doctor, well-paid surgeon. But, you know, there's probably a reason he was drinking all the time. There's probably a reason that he ran to that crowd of people at that unemployment demonstration. And that was because whatever was there before, that life he had, this fancy doctor who liked to go to jazz clubs and drink lots of alcohol, he didn't like who he was. He didn't like who he was. He looked himself in the mirror. He did not like who he was. Dr. Norman Bethune didn't like who he was. But when he saw that crowd of unemployed protesters, led by communists, being attacked by the police in 1933, he didn't consciously think it. The thoughts never went through his mind. But there was a part of his brain, a higher part of his brain, that said, this is my opportunity to be better. This is my opportunity to be better, to be a better person. This is my opportunity to be better. That is what went through his mind. Not consciously, but unconsciously. This is my opportunity to be better. And that's what John Brown thought. He heard about slavery. He heard about injustice. And he said, this is my opportunity to be a better person. I'm going to stand against slavery. William Z. Foster, Gus Hall. This is my opportunity to be better. I can become better not by buying a product from some capitalist, not through pumping myself full of medications and drugs. I can become better by joining arm in arm with other people to fight for justice. I can become a better person by engaging to rise in struggle. I can become a better person by putting myself on the front lines of the battle for the future. I can improve myself. I can become a better person by standing arm in arm with my brothers and fighting for what I know is right. And it was that drive to be better, to be part of something, to contribute to a greater cause, to connect himself with the rest of humanity, to achieve that oceanic feeling of oneness that Sigmund Freud can't understand and just can't comprehend. It was that drive that unleashes people to do very, very great things. And I view the mission of the Center for Political Innovation as laying the foundations so the house can be built, laying the tracks so the train can roll ahead, awakening the consciousness of the American people. Because the fight ahead is not going to be easy. The pill that we have to swallow, the great powers that we have to push back, the forces of evil that we're up against, bringing down U.S. imperialism, remaking this country and the whole world free from exploitation, free from profits in command, building a society where the people come first, not the greeds of a few. This is a bit of a titanic mission. Not the kind of thing you do, over coffee in the morning. And in order to do it, we need to make people better. We need to appeal to the better side of human beings. We need to offer people a way out, offer people a way forward. You're watching this right now because you want to be part of this. You're watching this right now because something about my message attaches and connects with you. I'm glad you're watching. I'm really glad you're watching. Because that means that you have the potential to become part of this project. So think about it. Just think about it. Think about what you can do to spread socialism. Think about what you can do to help the Center for Political Innovation move forward. Think about what you can do to raise the awareness of the people. Think about how we can bring about the new great awakening that needs to happen to lay the foundations for the overthrow of American capitalism and the rebirth of the country with socialism. Think about it. Think about it. Think about what can be done to save America from the nightmare of greed and profits. What can be done to overthrow U.S. imperialism and build a socialist, rational, healthy society? Lead us on the road to a world of prosperity, abundance, equality. Think about what you can do. Think about what you can do. Okay, and on that note, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Let's do the roll call. So we got John in Houston, Raphael in Brazil, Nate in Chicago, President Jesus in LA, Raphael in Brazil, Montreal, Canada, Olympia Logic, California, Nate and Dylan Smal, Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn, Nadia in East Harlem, NYC, Auckland, New Zealand, Alaska, Ash from Chicago, Nate from Sydney, Australia, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Mindanao to Midwest, Olympia Logic, Chicago, San Angelo, Solidarity in the house, out in Texas, great folks, Adelaide, Australia, Melbourne, Australia, Leo and Mimi from Mexico. Welcome, Leo and Mimi. Kieran from San Diego, Pomona, California, Eva in Brooklyn. Wow, Bendigo, Australia. Bendigo, Australia. Melbourne, Australia. San Joaquin Valley, California, BFE, Clydebank, Chaya in Montreal, good friend of the program, Los Angeles, Jeff, Asheville, North Carolina, Wyoming, Boise, Idaho, Mary in West Virginia, David in China, Keegan from New York, St. David's, Bermuda, Santa Barbara, Rhode Island, Bravo, Ben in Suffolk County, Ryan in Oakland, Isaac in Idaho, Ron in Santa Rosa, Balthazar in Oakland, Nigeria, New Jersey, California, Lafayette, Louisiana, Ukiah, California, Northern California, Australia, Kansas City, Kansas, Manchester, Tennessee, Lucha in Mississippi, Detroit, Michigan, Atlanta, Georgia, Naples, Florida, Troy in Kansas City, Missouri, Nashville, Tennessee, OP from Florida, Captain Waffles. Very good. Very, 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 very good. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And now, this is the part where I answer your super chat questions. Alrighty. You ready for me to answer your super chat questions? First question, was Juan Perón a fascist? No. Juan Perón was an anti-imperialist with, social democratic and Bonapartist tendencies. He was friendly to Marxism, and he did like Mussolini and such, but that was out of confusion and such. And in the developing world, this stuff gets very confusing, right? Fascism is, capitalism and imperialism in decay, becoming authoritarian, collapsing on its own weight. In the developing world, there is always a lot of confusion about these things. Throughout Latin America, there were many figures who were admirers of Hitler, simply because of the fact that they were, their main enemy was the United States, but they were anti-communist, right? And there were many figures in Argentina, in Brazil, in, Peru, and, Guatemala, and, Mexico. There were many figures in the Latin American ruling class who had weird confusion during World War II because they were, on the one hand, anti-communist, but on the other hand, anti-American and anti-British. So they didn't know what they were, and so they were like, whatever. And that's unfortunate, and it's wrong, but there was confusion about it. Juan Perón was an Argentine nationalist who, didn't like communists, but he, liked Argentina, didn't like American imperialism. So, yeah, he was very confused. But then as he moved into power, he, got friendly to the Soviet Union, had an alliance with the Communist Party. Sometimes, they were the left Peronists, they were the right Peronists. He said Che Guevara was one of the greatest Peronists he'd ever met. He spent a lot of time in Cuba and spoke of Fidel Castro in glowing terms. Peronism is it is an eclectic political trend. It's populist, it's populism. There are right-wing nationalist elements to it. There are left-wing social democratic elements to it. It's not Marxism, but, to dismiss Juan Perón as a fascist is a bit simplistic, right? Are there negative things about him? I understand he was vicious to indigenous people. That's awful. No endorsement of that. But it's complicated. It's complicated. Juan Perón was an important figure in Argentine history, and still to this day, Peronism is very much the ideology. I remember when I was at the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013, the booth for Argentina had a painting, like a poster, of Hugo Chavez and Juan Perón holding hands. And I asked the JP, the young Peronists, I said, wasn't Juan Perón a fascist? They said, no, Juan Perón was the most true communist who ever lived. And I said, wow, okay, Juan Perón is subject to a lot of interpretation. Let me just put it that way. Peronism it's populism, it's anti-imperialism, it's nationalism. There you go. And has socialistic implications, but it's complicated. That's my answer. The worst way that capitalism affects social relations. I would say the worst way that capitalism affects social relations in our time is isolating people, separating people from each other. You know, especially with the pandemic, but also with the way people are pitted against each other, the way people don't have time for real relationships, they don't have time for real connections, the way people are very isolated. Look, I live in New York City, and many people have pointed out that New York City, they say, for how is it possible to be so lonely with so many people around you? That's capitalism, right? That people don't know their neighbors, people, you know, they're surrounded by other people on the train, in the subway, but they just are disconnected from each other. That's capitalism. And yeah, the isolation, the alienation, yeah, there you go. All right. Is the collapse of Afghanistan bad for anti-imperialists? Well, here's the thing. I don't think the USA would have done this without making some kind of arrangement with the Taliban. The USA has been talking to the Taliban for a long time. The USA has been using Afghanistan as a center of instability. And I think some kind of deal has to have been made with the Taliban. But they're already playing up this, they're comparing it to Saigon, you know, and they're playing up this idea that, oh dear, this is, you know, this is what happens when the USA doesn't invade countries. You know, this is what happened. You know, they're using it to make pro-imperialist propaganda. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what's going on now, I don't see this as a victory against imperialism. There's some people who look at this and they say, oh no, the Vietnamese, when Saigon was liberated, you know, that was a victory. But this is a different situation. This is a lot of confusion, but this isn't. I mean, the Taliban, they could be anti-imperialist in some instances, and they could work for the imperialists in other instances. The Taliban, this is not a victory for anti-imperialism. This is a different situation. This is the USA has destroyed and wrecked a country for 20 years straight, and now they are pulling their forces out, but there's some kind of arrangement that's been made. We'll see what happens. Now, once the Taliban runs Afghanistan, we'll see what happens next. Now, I know Russia and China have been talking to the Taliban also, as have the Iranians. So we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. But I don't feel like this is a victory for anti-imperialism. I feel like this is a maneuver. That's what I think is happening here. And I really, when people, well, anyway, there you go. All right. Is North Korea a monarchy? No. North Korea is not a monarchy because first of all, a monarch, in a constitutional monarchy, they inherit the title, they rule by decree. I guess there's like limits on their power sometimes, but no. The reason that North Korea has, Kim Il-sung, and his son was Kim Jong-il, and his son is Kim Jong-un, the reason that's to make a political statement, and that is that the line of the Korean Workers' Party has not changed. During the fall of the Soviet Union, all throughout the Eastern Bloc, one of the main ways the U.S. media would manipulate socialist countries was by playing the hardliners against the moderates and dividing the Revolutionary Party, the ruling party. There's the hardliners and the moderates. And by having Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, having them there, that's making clear, the Korean Workers' Party says it's making clear that the line of Kim Il-sung, the revolutionary anti-imperialist line of Kim Il-sung, is still intact, that they are not selling out the revolution, and that they are not surrendering. That's what that's about, right? It's a political statement that they are continuing the tradition. NK News, that's a website. Don't you have to pay NK News now? Don't you have to pay for it? Isn't it like, it used to be NK News, you could read it. It's a news blog, like follows North Korea excessively. But I think you have to pay for it now, isn't it? I don't know if it's free. I don't know. I've seen some weird stuff on that blog. Look, you have to remember anything about North Korea, right? They can say just blatantly false things about North Korea. They can say them, and it's passed off as just undisputed fact. Kim Jong-il never claimed to have invented the hamburger, okay? Stuff like that you'll hear, and it's like, oh, ha ha ha, North Korea believes in unicorns, ha ha, and it's like you look into this stuff. Usually it's often just according to an anonymous source tied to the South Korean military or something, but it gets repeated in American media like it's undisputedly true. And that just shows how the power of propaganda works. Because the second, they repeat, North Korea claims that Kim Il-sung hit a hole-in-one the first time he ever played golf. Well, they don't say that. They don't say that, right? But if you raise your hand, I remember this in college. My professor would be reading off a bunch of bullshit about North Korea, and they claim that Kim Il-sung hit a hole-in-one the first time he played golf. I'd raise my hand. I'd say, that's not actually true. That's according to, the only source for that kind of thing is South Korean intelligence, and that's not, you just say that, right? And it's like, what? So you believe North Korea? It's like you create an atmosphere where they're the baddies. They're the baddies, and you can pretty much say anything you want about them, right? I mean, I could make up a story right now, Kim Il Sung, I don't know. I mean, there was a story going around that Kim Jong Il had executed his uncle by feeding him to a pack of wild dogs. That didn't happen. It was actually satire. It was like a satirical story on a Chinese blog, but they republished it as truth in American media because they're North Korea. You can say anything bad about them. Have they violated human rights in North Korea? I'm sure. It's a very rigid and authoritarian society, nowhere near the level of free speech that we have. I mean, it's locked down and ready to fight off an invasion at any time. Those folks are, they're holding out. That country's a giant bunker, and it's not a picnic. It's a very authoritarian military society resisting U.S. imperialism. I mean, so please don't misinterpret me as saying that it's a paradise there or they're free. And no, there's a lot of authoritarianism there. But then there's also a lot of things that we hear about North Korea that don't match reality, right? And so it's complicated again, but yeah, no, it's not an absolute monarchy. It's it's like Eastern Europe. It's really existing socialism. It's real socialism. It's the old 20th century Cold War socialist political model. They'd like to move closer to what China has. They'd like to move to a market socialist model. And I think that would be good for the country to have foreign investment and such. But right now, they're so barricaded and sieged, they don't have that opportunity. If you want to help North Korea, right, if you want to help North Korea be more open, help North Korea have more rights, get the USA to lift the sanctions against them. Get the USA to sign the treaty with them and end the Korean War, and officially end the Korean War. Get the sanctions against them lifted. Get the U.S. troops to leave South Korea and the threat of invasion, to end. If you want to help the people of North Korea, get the U.S. imperialists off their backs. And in the context of not being under attack, North Korean society could open up, and they want to have market reforms. They want to have foreign investment. They want to have more economic opportunities. So if you claim to support the people of North Korea, and you're supporting sanctions, blockades, you're part of this attacking Trump, how dare he shake hands with him? Oh, he's a dictator. If you're part of that, you don't really want to help the Korean people. You don't want to help the Korean people. You just are an anti-communist, right? That's all it is. If you really want to help the Korean people, let them breathe. Give them air to breathe. End the blockade. All right. How can you develop Marxist analytical skills? Well, it's very interesting. I got an interesting piece of advice from somebody a long time ago. And they said, if you can ever get your hands on the complete works of Lenin, one thing to do is every day on your way to work, if you're taking the subway to work, take a volume from the complete works of Lenin, a random volume, and read it. And I remember when I used to have the complete works of Lenin, I learned a lot from reading not What Is to Be Done, not The State and Revolution, but those random essays, the letters that he wrote people. Lenin would be talking about World War One, and he'd be like, well, based on what the Kaiser is doing, and he'd be talking about coal production. He'd be talking about, and Lenin was constantly processing economic data, constantly processing political information, and writing letters to people or writing little short articles about it. And that stuff, those little pieces that Lenin wrote to his comrades or wrote for the Pravda or the Iskra newspaper, you look at that, you can learn how a communist thinks about things, right? There's a great book called Lenin on the United States, and it's like a volume, and it's like everything that Lenin ever wrote about the USA, and I used to have it. And it's, Lenin writes about the American elections. He writes about the rate of illiteracy in the United States and how it compares to Russia. And it's like Lenin is processing information and analyzing and coming to political conclusions. And I learned a lot by reading every article in Lenin on the United States, right? If you want to develop a Marxist analysis, a Marxist way of analyzing things, the main thing to do is to read people who are doing that, right? And find people that are able to do it, and learn to process information the way they do, right? that's really the main way to do things. And that's the value of Marxist writing, right? I'm on here giving commentary. I'm giving Marxist analysis, I suppose. But sometimes you have to do writing. You have to assemble data. You have to have quotations. You have to, sometimes, and that's the value of having communist newspapers and communist publications, right? Or, read the Morning Star in the UK. Read the People's World. Read read the communist publications, right? Because good when communist publications are doing the right thing, um, all countries have the right to self determination. It's not the business of anybody else. Exactly. I agree, Jay Grimes. I agree. So there you go. I would read Marxist analysis and process the information and learn to process it like that. Read Marxist analysis and apply what you've learned, right? Apply what you've learned. All right. Um, what is Russia's relationships with ex-Soviet Central Asian republics? It tends to be pretty good. U.S. media doesn't often talk about the governments of the Central Asian republics, but when it does, it will accuse them of being puppets of Russia and such. And Russia has a good relationship with those folks. The Eurasian Economic Union, there's economic development there. And when I was in Russia, I went to the World Conference of Parliament, what is it, the World Conference of Parliamentarians or whatever, and a number of people from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and, a lot of Russia has a lot of influence in those places. And there's a lot of Soviet nostalgia in those countries as well. Um, so, when I listened to the speeches by a lot of those folks, they were very worried about social media. I mean, can you imagine if you had a very poor country, in Central Asia, and everyone gets Facebook, and you're worried there's going to be a new Arab Spring, there's going to be Al Qaeda setting up shop, and I went to a workshop at this World Conference of Parliamentarians. I was listening to speaker and parliament member after parliament member from Central Asia, from Eastern Europe getting up. They're worried about Facebook. They're worried about Twitter. And why are they worried about it? Well, they're worried that the USA is going to use this to foment unrest and destruction. They're trying to bring hospitals into Central Asia. They're trying to bring railroads in there. They're trying to bring power plants in there, right? And they're worried that, all the kids get Facebook, pretty soon they're going to be rioting and tearing everything up, and Al Qaeda is going to come in there and set up shop and blow shit up, and Saudi propaganda is going to be fomenting Islamic terrorism. They have legit fears. And if I was in Central Asia, I would be terrified of Facebook. I might be one of the people trying to outlaw Facebook or outlaw Twitter. I'm not saying that's what they should do, but I understand their concerns. When I heard these guys, these Central Asian politicians, members of parliament, talking about how worried they are about social media, look at the Arab Spring. Do you blame them? Do you blame them? All right. Will the rapid and humiliating advance of the Taliban impede U.S. imperial ambitions for a while? I just answered that, Frank. I just answered that. That was like 2 questions ago. I answered that. Impede for a while, or is the U.S. planning another major conflict soon? Frank, I just answered that. Roll the tape back. I just answered that. I just answered that. All righty. Okay. The Belt and Road Initiative. China is laying the foundations of real wealth, not fictitious capital. Absolutely. When China is going around the world building hospitals, building schools, building railroads, it's about, infrastructure that lays the basis for the economy. And that's what the Belt and Road is very much about. Someone said they're going to eat themselves to death. I don't know what to tell you, sir. If you're compulsively eating, there's a lot of people who compulsively eat, and that is a common problem that people have. So, I think there's probably a mental health professional out there that could give you some help if you're worried about eating yourself. You're just compulsively eating. I would consult a mental health professional. That's what I would urge you to do. I have no idea what to tell you because I have not known anyone who dealt with that problem, but I understand it is a common problem. So don't be ashamed. Go and get some help. Go and get some help to deal with that. So there you go. Next question. How do we organize under COVID? Well, we're doing it right now. I mean, people organize. I mean, people are out on the streets handing out leaflets. People are, under lockdown, it was a little more difficult. But now that things are opening up, people are having rallies and protests and stuff like that. And let me add that, you can organize online. I mean, my social media vastly expanded since the pandemic. I was on here streaming, spreading these ideas. You can organize under COVID. All right, what was the secret speech? Well, it was the 20th Party Congress, 1956. Stalin had been dead for a couple years. Khrushchev was the new leader of the Soviet Union, and he gathered the Soviet Communist Party together and took a giant dump on Stalin and accused Stalin of being awful. And that speech kind of wrecked the global communist movement, and especially in the United States. McCarthyism, a lot of these people had been through McCarthyism. They'd been jailed. They'd made a lot of sacrifices. And then to have they've been through all this hardship, and then to have the leader of the Soviet Union say that Stalin was just as bad as U.S. media said he was, that devastated them, and it really hurt the Communist Party USA. They lost a lot of people. Most people interpret the secret speech, the correct analysis, I should say, is that was Khrushchev groveling before the United States, right? Stalin, he was saying, Stalin, the guy who came before me, was a hardliner, but don't worry, I want to negotiate. And it was him kind of softening, and it was a gesture to the imperialists. It wasn't aimed at the Soviet Communist Party. It was really aimed at the international audience. It was a gesture aimed at the United States, and, to say that don't worry, I'm not a hardliner like Stalin. I'm not a revolutionary anti-imperialist. I want to negotiate. It was a signal from the moderate wing of the Soviet bureaucracy that that basically they were willing to make concessions and negotiate with the United States. And in order to do it, they would throw the good name of Stalin under the bus. And it was completely disorienting for the global communist movement. It ultimately, eventually resulted in the Sino-Soviet split, though at first China embraced de-Stalinization, but then later, China ultimately denounced, Khrushchev and, the Soviet Union, and it was a mess. It was a devastating blow. North Korean Bruce Cummings. Bruce Cummings is a very important scholar of North Korea. I'll just answer that since we're here. Very important scholar of North Korea. Very important scholar, and he has various critiques, but he gives, he points to North Korea's strengths also. Bruce Cummings, he wrote Korea's Place in the Sun, and he wrote North Korea and Other Countries. He's probably the most respected Korea scholar in the USA. And there's other things in his books. At one point, he's kind of making fun of their accents, and it's a little strange, but he's one of the most sympathetic voices to North Korea in American academia by far. And I've met him before, actually, which is another story, but I doubt he remembers me. It was years ago. But there you go. Ceausescu. Yeah, why does this come up so much, right? A lot of these super chats are repeats, but that's okay. Ceausescu was the leader of socialist Romania. He oversaw a lot of industrialization, raised a lot of people out of poverty. In the 80s, he started collaborating with the United States and got in debt to the World Bank and the IMF, and that devastated the economy of Romania. And that probably contributed to his ultimate downfall. So he's a mixed figure. All right, there you go. The Center for Political Innovation Australia. I think that'd be great. If you want to start a CPI Australia, let's do it. I know there's interest in doing that. I know, David and Helen and some others are interested in doing that. Let's get the ball rolling. I would be all for a Center for Political Innovation of Australia. I would be all for it. All right. So the next one was like social democracy, a viable alternative to the nuclear family. I don't know. I think people should be able to have their family however they want it. I know people that are, that have children that are LGBT and they adopt, and that's okay. I know people who've been raised by single parents, and that's okay. There you go. Social democracies, European social democracies. Well, these countries are, they're Western capitalist countries that have a very, very big social welfare state. But right now, in the age of austerity and the age of mass migration, those welfare states are being rolled back. As far as Zero Books, isn't that like a publishing house in Britain that's kind of Marxist or something? Don't they publish like Slavoj Žižek or something like that? Okay. All right, next question. Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the most hopeful time in the history of the U.S. South. There's land being redistributed. That was the beginning of public education in the South. Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois is a very important book. I would encourage you to read Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois. Reconstruction was betrayed, ultimately. The troops were pulled out of the South. They handed the South back over to the Jim Crow folks, but there were good things happening for a while. All right. Next question. Are we part of a new dark age? I think it's possible. I fear that, if the USA were to collapse and not move towards socialism, but were to just collapse and break into pieces, we could head to a new dark age. And I think that would be bad. Russia and China are there, so there would be stability, at least on the other side of the world. But a collapse is a bad thing, right? And the dark ages followed a collapse. Proletarian internationalism. Um, a collapse is not something you want to live through. The fall of the Roman Empire devastated Europe. I mean, Europe did not return to the population level it had at the height of the Roman Empire for another 1,100 years, 1,100 years, right? Collapses are not good. And that's what people don't get. They want we want the empire to fall. Yes, I want imperialism to fall, but if it just falls and breaks into pieces and goes to something worse, that doesn't help anybody. We want a new system. We want a new higher order to emerge to replace it. So I did not read Marcy Smith Parenti's article on Gray Zone. I'll have to check it out. Didn't read it. Why are corporate profits higher than ever? Because all their competitors have been devastated, right? That's one aspect of the pandemic is that Walmart is doing great. Its competitors are weakened. Amazon is doing great. Everyone was stuck at home buying their stuff online. Corporate profits are higher because wealth is centralized. That's what happens when there's an economic downturn like this. Some people go out of business, and then wealth centralizes in fewer and fewer hands. So there you go. Is China practicing proletarian internationalism? Well, in a way, yes. Here's the thing. China's not the Comintern. They're not they're not directing global communist parties to fight for communism. But China is a socialist society that is trying to reorient the global economy to trade on the basis of win-win cooperation and build infrastructure around the world and create economic relations between developing countries, that are different, that are based on mutual economic development. So there you go. I've met Grover Furr before. I think his best book is Blood Lies, which is his criticism of Timothy Snyder, who is the professor at Yale. If you read Blood Lies, which is his refutation of Bloodlands by Dr. Timothy Snyder, he just picks apart that guy. So if you want to check out the writings of Grover Furr, I would recommend that. I would recommend, in particular, Blood Lies. But, he wrote about the secret speech. He wrote Khrushchev Lied. He wrote, Trotsky's amalgams. And, he's written a lot about the Moscow trials. And honestly, a lot of that stuff is very complex and very detailed. And, I don't, when he starts talking about the assassination of Sergei Kirov and stuff like that, I don't know. I can't. I listen to him talk. He has his perspective. At the end of the day, I don't really care about that stuff, okay? I don't care who killed Sergei Kirov. I don't care about the Moscow trials. I care that the Soviet Union, despite everything it went through, it industrialized, it raised millions of people out of poverty. It shows that there is an alternative to capitalism. And I worry about getting too caught up in the who was right and who was wrong and what decision was correct, But, he knows Soviet history very well. And his work is studied around the world by different scholars and institutions. So there you go. The Abraham Lincoln Brigade during the Spanish Civil War. That was Americans who went and fought in Spain, right? It was American communists, like 4,000 or 5,000 of them, who went and fought in Spain for the Spanish Republic. You skipped my question about wokeism. What was your question about wokeism? Right-wing libertarianism to wokeism. Well, I've argued that the USA is, at this point, that they're trying to foment kind of a woke makeover for U.S. imperialism. That during the Cold War, China and the Soviet Union made clear the United States was a racist society founded on genocide. So now the United States, in order to compete with Russia and China, is like having a woke makeover, trying to present itself as this woke, sexually liberal, open, free society, whereas, Russia and China are these stodgy, old authoritarian regimes. They're trying to basically, change U.S. society in order to market U.S. imperialism more effectively. The white supremacy and the chauvinism and all that. They're trying to, change the image and the culture of the United States in order to make it more effective in combating Russia and China. To some degree or other, I'm opposed to racism, and I'm glad, the police brutality issue is being addressed to some degree, at least. But that's not socialism, right? Socialism isn't woke imperialism and IDPOL and all of that. We need... the woke makeover is not going to solve the underlying problems of capitalism. It's not. It's simply not going to do that. We still have problems. Capitalism is still a deeply problematic system. So the woke makeover, right, and it seems like that's the fight now, is there's this culture war that the richest of the rich want the woke makeover so they can effectively market themselves on a global scale. And there's a lot of folks across middle America who don't. Why did I form CPI versus joining an existing think tank? Well, because I want to engage in a specific project of socialist education. I want to engage in a specific project of socialist education. I want to educate people about socialism. I want to convene classes and panels and stuff. And I mean, I don't know of any other socialist think tank that's quite like CPI. Obviously, I'm not going to join the Heritage Foundation. I'm not going to join the American Enterprise Institute. I'm not going to join Jacobin. Are they a think tank? I think Jacobin Media. I think they're not. They're not a think tank. But I didn't know of anyone doing it the other way. But I will work with other people. I want to have panels with other people. And I'm just going to keep doing it. And that's what these people don't understand. They really don't understand. And I spent way too long talking about it last night. Today I just gave an inspirational speech. But what these folks don't understand is that, like, first of all, I just want to do my thing. I don't want to compete with you. If you don't like what I do it better than me or whatever. I don't care. Number one, I'm not going to stop, right? And I'm not interested in playing the chessboard or the maneuver. I'm not trying to take over your party. I'm not trying to outmaneuver you, and I'm not. You know what I mean? What was the cause of the MPLA to go from the ML from Social Democrat? It was the fall of the Soviet Union. Yeah, I mean, that was after the fall of the Soviet Union. The MPLA was in a weaker position, and it needed to make concessions, and it needed to make some alliances with different capitalist forces around the world. And it's a very poor country that needs foreign investment. And so the MPLA moved away from being an ML party to being a social democratic party. Officially, the MPLA is still a socialist party, but they no longer officially have ML as their line. That makes sense. And there's not everyone in the MPLA is an ML. There are still MLs in the MPLA, but there are also a lot of people in the MPLA that are more social democratic in their orientation. And there's people in the MPLA that are more pro-Russia and China. And there's people in the MPLA that are more pro-Western. Cuba still has a huge amount of influence in Angola. There's still a very strong relationship between Angola and Cuba. There's still a huge amount of state-run enterprises and such, but there's a big wing of the Angolan bureaucracy that is oriented toward the West and oriented toward neoliberalism and such. There are different perspectives. So Angola is a complicated situation, but it has a very good relationship with China, a very good relationship with Russia and with Cuba, but it also has a relationship with there's a pro-Western wing of the party there. So it's complicated. Angola is it's one of these countries that won its liberation with a Marxist-Leninist party, but because it was surrounded and attacked, it never really got to fully lay the basis of a full-blown socialist planned economy. It's not Cuba. It's not North Korea. It's not Vietnam. It's a country that broke out of Western capitalism and nationalized its oil and has a revolutionary party in charge, and it's a largely capitalist economy. South Africa, you could compare it to South Africa's situation, right? You could compare it to Zimbabwe. Even Namibia. Now, Namibia at this point, I wouldn't say there's very much revolutionary energy left, but you could compare it to Namibia in a way. I mean, the SWAPO organization, the Southwest African People's Organization, certainly had revolutionary roots. And, you have to remember, and that these parties are big parties that are running these countries. And and there's a lot of people in those parties who do teach doctrinaire Marxism, There's a lot of people in those parties who are still MLs, even though there's a lot of people in those parties that have long ago abandoned ML. It's complicated, right? It's complicated. There's different wings, and based on different global circumstances, different wings of those parties will come forward. And it's complicated. There's a lot of people who think that they can figure this out by reading a Wikipedia page. And I as someone who's been to international communist gatherings, someone who's been to, I've been to, the Yalta Economic Forum in Crimea and talked to people from these countries. You're not going to learn this stuff on Wikipedia. It's way more complicated than you think. I've met with people from the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU-PF, right? It's way more complicated than you think. I've met with people from the MPLA, right? And again, it's more complicated than you think, okay? And, if you want to just make it that simple, if you want to make it like, oh, I looked at their Wikipedia page, it's like, no, it's always more complicated than that. And there's different global forces. And these are very poor countries. They're very poor countries. They're impoverished, developing countries trying to raise their people out of poverty. They need foreign investment, but they also, have anti-imperialism, and they know the imperialists are trying to keep them poor. And so it's complicated. It's a very complicated situation. But there you go. I am going to end it here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of the New World War still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a New World War still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Fusion City now, Fusion City now, Fusion City now. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night.